China's battle against domestic terrorism is working. That's the message of a new white paper on Xinjiang. It's the third white paper on the region produced this year and explains in details what happens in these vocational training centers and the legal basis and the effects of such measures so far. But will this white paper do enough to dispel Western critics who accuse China of violating the rights of Xinjiang's Uyghur people? Joining me for the discussion here in the Beijing studio is Victor Gao, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, and also Ms. Wang Wenwen, a journalist with the Global Times newspaper. Welcome to The Point. So the title of this white paper, which was released on Friday, was The Fight Against Terrorism and Extremism and Human Rights Protection in Xinjiang. As I said, this is the third white paper this year. The previous two were respectively called Historical Matters Concerning Xinjiang, explaining the historical circumstances of the situation. And there was another one earlier in that year, which also gave out some statistics as to the effectiveness of these measures. So, Victor, explain to us why the need of a third white paper and why so many white papers one after another.
Well, first of all, the situation in Xinjiang is very complicated. It borders with countries like Afghanistan, which has gone through wars of more than a decade and is still going on. And there is definitely a spillover of terrorism, extremism into Xinjiang. And combined with the local separatism, it really has constituted a very lethal force. And it is for the record that terrorist attacks have happened in major cities in China, including in Beijing, as well as many places in Xinjiang, and no one should deny such facts. And also, there have been arrests of Uyghur fighters who fought against the NATO troops and American troops in Afghanistan. This is all the fact. However, I think there is a tendency by Western media or some Western countries who are seized up on so-called correctional measures that the Chinese government has been doing, and they try to mischaracterize the whole situation as if it's a Chinese government's violation of the human rights of the Uyghur people. In reality, it's just the opposite. It's meant very much for the protection of the people and to prevent the spillover and spread of extremism, terrorism, and separatism. So I think this gives the rise to the reason and need why the government need to come up with such papers to explain the situation and tell the real story on the ground in Xinjiang.
Yeah, actually, this white paper I think is well worth reading because it's very detailed. I read it in full in English, and I find it answers a lot of questions from the Chinese perspective, because I think this is the very first time that it was given in details, for instance, what the people were learning, were doing in these centers, exactly what they were learning, what kind of laws they were learning about, what kind of rights they were being taught that they enjoy, and what kind of obligations and the legal basis, for instance, of these measures. So I want to quote this sentence, which I find to be very interesting. It says, as to one of the reasons why such measures, such centers were erected, it says it is hard for some people who have been convicted of terrorist or extremist crimes to abandon extremist views, as their minds have been poisoned to the extent of losing reason and the ability to think sensibly about their lives and the law. Ms. Wang, what kind of situation are we looking at when the government is dealing with these people are taking these measures? Why do they have to highlight such phenomenon?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Victor said just now, that the situation in Xinjiang is quite complicated. As what we have seen, like in Hong Kong, the definition of terrorism is very difficult to make. So like in Xinjiang, what we have seen is a very extreme cases. So when we define these people and when we try to correct these people, we have to have a legal basis, and we want to make our course just, and also we have to take consideration of their rights. So the Chinese government is facing a very difficult situation in dealing with both. Yeah.
Because we have laws, we have prisons, we have courts to deal with people who actually commit, for instance, robbery or murder. But for people who have gone radical in their minds, there is not an established system to deal with that kind of challenge.
Let me single out one example. For example, in China, it is a crime to deprive any kids to go to school to receive compulsory education. So everyone need to send their kid to school for compulsory education. This is a law in China. Therefore, in Xinjiang, there are instances where, because of extremism and separatism and sometimes terrorism, for example, there are families, especially among Uyghur people, who actually prevent their kids from going to school for the continued education.
Why
Can you
not?
believe it? Because they have been badly influenced by the so-called view that if you send the kid to go to school, then because it's public school, some courses are taught in Mandarin and your kids are supposed to learn Mandarin, and they basically claim by learning Mandarin, that is the Han Chinese language, for example, it will deprive the kids of their Muslim traditions or heritage. It is far from true. This is really an extreme version of falsehood, because if you prevent the kid from going to school to receive education, for example, how could the kid survive successfully in society later? How can they really expect to find a meaningful job? How can they fit in as a citizen of the People's Republic of China in society anywhere in the country? For example, such extreme measures and extreme views need to be corrected. The families need to continue to support their kids, to send the kids to school, and everyone need to do the right thing. That is, no one should prevent the kids from going to school.
It's also written in this white paper, and I want to quote again here, that it says, without necessary intervention measures, it will not be possible for the trainees to cast off the shackles of religious extremism, get back to normal life, and improve their prospects for a better future. How important is that fight, Victor, once again, for the Chinese government? Why is it important for such intervention measures to be taken so that the people who were on the brink or who were induced or coerced or incited to go on the path of terrorism can come back, be helped?
First of all, please allow me to emphasize that China is a big supporter of Islam and the Arab countries. Look at what China has done over the decades in support of Palestinian causes, in support of the Muslim countries in general. Look at the relations between China and Pakistan, for example. So anyone in the world who wants to depict a wrong impression of China as not a big supporter of Islam and the Arab countries, etc., is falsifying the situation to start with. Now, there are extreme forces who try to depict the situation that Xinjiang is not part of China. Xinjiang should be a separate country. They basically say the Kazakhs have Kazakhstan, the Uzbeks have the Uzbekistan, etc. Why shouldn't Uyghur have their own Eastern Turkmenistan state, for example? Such is a crime in China, because you are talking about splitting Xinjiang away from China, and by law, by Chinese constitution, all the government resources need to be devoted to fight against such separatist movements.
And that would be a crime in many countries, I would say, in a great majority of countries as well, if you want to split any part of the country away.
Absolutely. That's why when people have been indoctrinated by such wrong, falsified, and very extreme indoctrination, for example, then of course you have a right to make sure that they no longer move in the wrong direction.
Yeah. When just now you mentioned that these trainees were also taught or educated or trained about their own rights. That's very interesting, because a lot of people in the West or in the Western press are accusing China taking rights away from them. On what basis is the white paper making that claim, and what is your understanding?
I think there's a basic difference between China and the West about the definition of human rights. I think at the current stage, China pays more attention to like poverty, education, and they want to make these people to have the who can make their own living and who can get rid of those extreme thoughts. So I think China pays more attention to such kind of rights than the rights of freedom and the rights of human democracy. I think this is also a difference is determined by the different development stage between China and the West.
Victor, what is your take? Are there different priorities? Are we talking about different priorities of the definition of human rights in this matter, or are we talking about protecting human rights needless where we're talking about?
No, I think China attaches as much, if not more, attention to protecting the human rights or the democratic rights of the people in general. However, given the circumstances in China, we really need to take care of many different priorities. And I think Ms. Wang is absolutely right. In China, we believe that the right to safety, right not to worry about your security, for example, and right to a decent life, right to improving living standards.
Let me interrupt you here. Let me be the devil's advocate here and ask this question, because that's the question a lot of people ask in the West. Why do you prevent these people from going home? Then if you protect their human rights, why do they have to stay in these training centers? By the way, according to the white paper, these people can go home regularly and they have the freedom of correspondence, but they do have to stay in the center to study, to get training, and they cannot just leave whenever they want or for however long they want, or just leave the place permanently.
I've been to Xinjiang many times. And I have my personal observations and experiences with many of the Uyghur people. Many of the Uyghur people are my brothers and sisters. There's no doubt about it. However, I do sense a real sense of fear and terror in some of the villages, mainly because if you have some extremists who are exposed,
these measures were taken, or still?
Still. Why? Because some of these people have been fighting in Afghanistan. More recently, they have been fighting in Syria, for example. They illegally get out of China, they illegally get into China, and they bring back a special version of extreme ideology. And they really want to threaten the villages, for example, and cause such a deterrence against them, so they can lead them blindly into the wrong direction.
Okay.
I think this is a force, evil force, that China as a country and the Chinese government need to fight against.
Well, your take on the question?
I think the move is to protect more ordinary people from being incited, from being affected by their possibly extreme acts. Yeah, I think it's for the general good of the wider public.
It's very interesting that this white paper, and I strongly recommend people go and take a look at it. It's not very long. It's 18 pages, and it's very clearly laid out. It says there are 3 categories of people: those who have been incited to become radicalized, but they have yet to commit a crime that really deserves to be punished, for instance, by imprisonment, or they have shown their willingness to improve themselves without having caused any major harm or damage, and those who have committed crimes in terms of terrorism, who have been punished, but they are on the way of recovering. So again, we are really running out of time. I have to thank my guest Victor and Wang Wenwen here, but I strongly recommend our audience to go and find this white paper. It's really easy. So that's it for this edition of The Point. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow at the same time.